Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, 1945. Chapter 24. When the guards at Sachsenhausen tired of us, they shipped us off by train to Bergen-Belsen. We traveled by cattle car again, and again prisoners died of starvation and suffocation along the way. Once the Nazis dropped 3 loaves of bread in our car through a hole at the top, just to watch us fight for it. As our train pushed farther north, there was more room to breathe as the dead dropped to the floor. The train arrived at Bergen-Belsen in the morning, my 7th concentration camp in less than 3 years. The commandant of the camp took one look at us and started screaming at our guards. "What did you bring me? Look at these skeletons! How do you expect these walking dead to work?" The commandant moved among us, pointing at prisoners. Him, him, he said, and soldiers pulled the men out of the ranks. I puffed up my chest to try and look as strong and healthy as I could, but the commandant took one look at me and moved on past, picking other prisoners. My heart cried out, "No! I had to be strong enough to work. Work was the only way to survive." When the commandant had pulled 75 prisoners out of our lines, he had them march to the other side of the tracks and ordered his soldiers to shoot them. They were gunned down before we surviving, wide-eyed prisoners even had time to react. I quickly turned away. I couldn't watch. The commandant hadn't chosen the strongest. He'd taken the weakest. I just couldn't tell the difference. How he could, I didn't understand. I felt terrible for it, but secretly I was glad it had been somebody else who was killed, and not me. "Take the others back to the barracks," the commandant said with disgust. "No work for a week, until they regain their strength." I couldn't believe my ears. No work for a week? What kind of trick was this? I could see the other prisoners glancing at one another, wondering the same thing. But it was no trick. When we got back to the barracks, we were fed the thickest, richest soup I had eaten in 6 years, and big pieces of fresh bread, hot from the oven. I was so thin and miserable I thought I could gain weight just from the smell alone. There was no gas chamber here either, and no chimneys burning red in the night. Maybe Bergen-Belsen really was better than all the other camps. Maybe this was the place where I could survive until the war ended. I scarfed my piece of bread and washed it down with that delicious, meaty soup. But an hour later, I learned that even in kindness, the Nazis were cruel. Every one of us woke with the most terrible stomach cramps we'd ever had. Our poor stomachs weren't used to such hearty food. We spent the night changing places with one another on the 2 barrels left in the barrack. I finally drifted off close to dawn, still hunched over from the pain in my gut. The next day, they brought us more of the thick soup and warm bread, but this time I was careful. I remembered reading about medicine back in Krakow and learning that dry toast helped settle an upset stomach. So I traded my soup for more bread and toasted the bread over the wood stove in the barrack. I hated to give up the delicious soup, but the bread sat better with me, and I slowly began to get stronger. A week later, as promised, we were put back to work. It was the same as always, chopping wood, breaking rocks, building new camp buildings. One day I was hard at work hauling boards for the walls of a barrack when one of our new capos called me over. I studied him as I approached. He had a big round face that was covered with acne pits and scars. Without a word, he punched me in the face. My world exploded. Pain shot from my nose to my brain, and my head snapped back like I'd been hit with a shovel. I fell to the ground, clutching my face. "What did you do that for?" I cried. "What did I do?" I knew I shouldn't have said anything, but I didn't care. I was too stunned. My nose was already swelling up so badly I couldn't breathe through it. "You looked at me the wrong way," the capo told me. His eyes glittered with amusement before he told me to get up and get back to work. My head was throbbing. It was hard to stand. Dark red blood splotched my blue and gray striped uniform. I held the back of my sleeve to my nose, gently, tenderly. It still hurt so badly, trying to stem the bleeding. I hoped my nose wasn't broken. If it was, there was nothing I could do about it. I made it back to the boards I'd dropped, trying not to let my tears spill over. "Moonface," one of the other prisoners said as he fell in alongside me. "What?" I said. "Moonface. That's what we call him." He nodded to the big round-faced kappa who'd slugged me. "They say he killed 3 men before the war. The Germans put him in prison, but when the war started they made him a capo. We've got murderers for guards." I knew our guards were murderers now, but I didn't know some of them were convicted killers in the past. I made sure to stay well clear of Moonface after that, but somehow I always managed to be assigned to work duty near him. He seemed to notice me wherever I went too, and soon I became his pet project. Moonface kicked me and hit me and beat me whenever he could. Bergen-Belsen might have been the place for me to survive until the end of the war, but for Moonface. I had to get away from him. When I heard the Nazis were rounding up workers to send them to another camp, I made sure I was at the front of the line. But the Nazis weren't looking for volunteers. They had their own method for choosing us already figured out. "Only the strongest and healthiest prisoners will be transferred," the Nazi announced. "To prove which of you is most able, there will be a race." More games. Each of us had to take off our clothes, roll them into bundles, and dash from one side of the barracks to the other. The Nazis watched and laughed as we staggered through the maze of beds. When it was my turn, I took off my uniform and was surprised again at how skinny I was. Even after a week of rest and better food, my arms and legs still looked like toothpicks. "You!" one of the Nazis yelled at me. "Run!" I ran as fast as I could. I had to win this race. I had to get out of Bergen-Belsen. I had to get away from Moonface. I was running for my life. I stumbled around one of the beds and crashed into another, bruising my thigh very badly, but I still flew through the doorway at the other side of the barrack faster than some of the other prisoners. When I burst outside, all I wanted to do was collapse on the ground until my lungs stopped burning and my legs stopped shaking, but I knew if I did that the Nazis would never pick me to move on. Instead, I forced myself to stand up and look relaxed, like I'd just taken a stroll in the park. "He can work," one of the guards said. I took my time putting my uniform back over my bony body, bending over so they couldn't see me gasping for breath. I spotted Moonface out in the yard, pushing another prisoner to the ground and kicking him. Another cattle car awaited me, and so did another camp. But at least I had gotten away from Moonface, for good.